Фільм «Жнива розпачу» «Harvest of Despair» був премійований багатьма нагородами на міжнародних фестивалях, серед яких 7 перших нагород в Монреалі, Х'юстоні, Нью-Йорку, Йорктоні і Лос-Анджелес. Отримані нагороди є доказом того, що цей фільм розповів людям всього світу правду про ті далекі часи.
1929. Stalin strikes at the nation's heart and mind, its church and intelligentsia. Over the next few years, the systematic liquidation of intellectuals is carried out by the communist regime in Ukraine. 5,000 scholars, scientists, poets, and artists prominent during Ukraine's independence are arrested for allegedly belonging to the SVU, a secret organization the Soviets claim is planning an armed insurrection. Only 45 get a public trial. No evidence is considered necessary. Thousands upon thousands are imprisoned, deported, and executed later as mass arrests continue throughout the 30s. Even the church is accused of involvement in this alleged plot.
Many priests were arrested. Many were sent to Siberian concentration camps. Many shot. My father was one of them. He never came back. I know this from personal experience. 30 bishops were murdered. Thousands of priests were perished. 100,000 of faithful were liquidated. Metropolitan Wasyl Lipkivsky and his 2 successors were arrested too. To this day, we don't know what happened to them.
Церкві було повно людей.
The church was full of people.
На конях заїхали.
Some communists rode inside on horseback and ordered me to undress.
Це березень місяць.
It was March.
На дворі сніг.
There was snow outside.
Я у мештах.
The snow was melting, and I walked in water up to my knees while they rode on horseback.
На конях.
They interrogated me, but I didn't answer their questions. And for this, I was rewarded with pistol blows across my back.
They began taking down the icons and smashing them on the ground. The people wanted to go inside the church, but they didn't let them. They ruined everything, smashed everything in the church. And the people stood outside crying because they couldn't do anything. When a man went up to remove the bell, and that bell fell to the ground and rang out, all the people burst into tears. Everyone was weeping and saying goodbye to the bell, because that was the last time that bell rang.
By 1930, only the Russian Orthodox Church remains. In October 1928, Stalin introduces a drastic 5-year plan to transform the Soviet Union from a backward rural society into a modern, self-sufficient industrial empire, virtually overnight. Military defense takes priority. Socialism must be protected from all future enemies. Western technology is urgently needed. To pay for it, Stalin must seize the only exportable resource, grain. And so he decrees the compulsory collectivization of agriculture. Henceforth, all private lands, livestock, and farming implements will belong to the state. The farmer will work as a laborer for pay, like a worker in a factory.
One of the intriguing elements in the Ukraine was that it brought together both the peasant question and the nationality question in a way that was somewhat different than in other areas. Because in the Ukraine, Ukrainians tended to concentrate in rural areas, and in the city areas, particularly in the eastern Ukraine, it was Russian and Jewish populations that dominated. So that any policies that the Bolsheviks adopted toward the peasants had an obvious impact on Ukrainians very directly.
With the destruction of the intellectuals and the church well underway, collectivization allows Stalin to break the farmers, the backbone of the nation. Anticipating fierce resistance, he orders the liquidation of the kulaks as a class. Kulak is a Bolshevik label for the wealthier farmers who own 24 acres of land or hire labor. They are considered the potential leaders in any revolt. The state confiscates not only the lands of the farmers, classified as kulaks, but also all their possessions. It is forbidden by law to assist these enemies of the people. Miroslava Vudka was 7 when her father was exiled. She never saw him again.
In the winter of 1931, they came to evict us from our house. Activists, a group of people, if they could be called people, came into the house and looked over everything and made us very frightened. Then they said, "Get out. This isn't your house anymore." But Mother wouldn't leave. "At least let us spend the rest of the winter here," she begged. "Where can I go with these children and old people?" The men picked her up and threw her outside. A militiaman or activist stood in the doorway as a guard. Mother shouted to us, "Children, don't leave the house." There were tears and screams. It was frightening. We grabbed hold of the benches in the house, screaming and refusing to let go. Then the men began to take us out one by one. They would throw one of us outside and then another. Thus, they threw us out of the house, one by one, all 6 of us.
A courageous neighbor risked deportation to give her family shelter. Some farmers burn their crops, kill their livestock, and flee to the cities. But over the next 3 years, 1 million men, women, and children are rounded up, jammed into sealed boxcars, and shipped off to the remotest corners of the Soviet Union. The survivors work as slave labor, producing raw materials for export to the West. This is the end of the line for many of the best farmers and cultural and religious leaders of Ukraine. Young party activists are brought in from the cities to push through collectivization. Anyone who opposes the measures is denounced as a kulak and deported. Yet resistance comes from all quarters. Not so long ago, the Bolsheviks had given land to the poor. Now they want to take it away.
Thank God I didn't kill anyone. I didn't have anyone put away. I didn't inform on anyone. But I wrote. I was an agitator. I attended meetings and also told the peasants, "Bring in the grain. Hand over the grain. The workers have nothing to eat. There's a world crisis. Hitler has taken over in Germany. The Japanese are advancing into Manchuria. Our country is a fortress that's surrounded by enemies on all sides." And I yelled and begged and swore and threatened, of course. Anyone who doesn't bring in grain had better watch out for the punishing sword of the proletarian dictatorship. Well, I rattled on, as we all did, and believed that it was necessary.
дуже проти колективізації. І він
My father was very much against collectivization. He said they were ruining the village, that the Bolsheviks knew nothing about farm management, that even the old landlords were better managers than the Soviet district officials. But when you're 18 or 20 years old, who believes his father?
In 1930, Petro Grigorenko was one of the many students brought in from the cities to harvest the grain.
Потім саботаж, не здались люди.
There was rebellion, then sabotage. People did not give up. They attacked the local authorities, usually not killing anyone. They only tied them up and threw them into a barn or simply drove them from the village. And they took back their property, took back their horses, cows, and implements, which had just been taken by the collective. They would take all that back. To crush the rebellions, troops were sent in. They would shoot over the people's heads, but they would also shoot at their heads and their hearts.
Vasil Sokil witnessed a squad of GPU secret police attacking a lone, defiant farmer.
They formed a wide circle around the house. When they realized that the farmer inside had no more bullets left, they threw a grenade into the attic. After that, everything fell silent. The fact of that armed resistance burned itself into my memory. I saw that even under those terrible conditions, there were people who believed in fighting for the right to live as the Ukrainian farmer had always lived.
The wheat is left standing in the fields. The demoralized farmers respond to the ruinous taxes and the presence of troops by simply refusing to work. The grain quotas or taxes are deliberately raised to exceed what the individual farmers can possibly produce. Either they join the collectives where the taxes are 3 times lower or face exile as kulaks. By mid-1932, 3/4 of all Ukrainian farms are collectivized. Then, in August, crippling new quotas are levied on the collectives themselves. Another exorbitant quota is levied in October, and yet another at the beginning of the new year. These levies are impossible to meet.
The working people were getting rationing card, and they could get food from the warehouse in the village, like 1 liter of milk and 2 pounds of bread for a week. But the farmers, the peasants, they could not get anything anyplace. And so they had nothing to eat right away the second day after those people from government took everything from them.
The regime blames the farmers for the stringent food rationing in the cities. In reality, the Soviets are dumping tons of wheat on Western markets. The 1932 harvest yields enough grain to have fed the entire population of Ukraine for 2 years. Instead, famine ravages the country.
It was a spoken order. Stalin gave it. That there was a definite plan, I knew from the instructions given us by Stanislav Kosyar, the secretary of the Communist Party of Ukraine. He said, "The kulak wants to crush our Soviet government with the bony hand of famine. We will bend this bony hand back on the throat of the kulak."
The Russians came from house to house and took all the foods that people had in the house, starting with grain, flour, wheat, or barley, or whatever they had, up to the last drop of food. They took the beets, the beans, potatoes, whatever they had in cellars or in the house. And Besides that, they didn't trust them. They started searching the houses, looking all over, digging in the house, in holes in the floors, digging in the ovens, ruining their ovens. And so they went from house to house and took everything from peasants.
In 1931, the farmers crowd into the cities, selling heirlooms, anything, in order to buy the bread they themselves have produced. An internal passport system is introduced to deliberately confine them to their villages. 1932, Stalin condemns the Ukrainian party's urgent appeals to reduce quotas and send aid. He accuses them of placing local interests above the success of the 5-year plan. The war for bread is the war for socialism, he says. Stalin's trusted envoy, Pavel Postyshev, is given sweeping dictatorial powers and sent into Ukraine with an army of secret police to purge the Ukrainian party ranks and to squeeze out the last kernels of grain.
Деякі інформаційні джерела твердять, що під час Голодомору загинуло не 7, але 11 мільйонів українських селян. Друга частина цього фільму, яку ми покажемо на другий тиждень, представить більше фактів цього Голокосту. Після перерви пропонуємо вашій увазі громадські оголошення.